So welcome everyone to our annual Faculty Perspectives on Public Service panel. I want to thank all of the 1Ls who've joined us today, as well as the three members of our faculty, Professors Michelle Wild-Anderson, Professor Elizabeth Reese, and Professor David Sklansky. Our hope today is to take a pretty informal approach to this. I have asked each of the three of them to talk a little bit about their public interest careers before they joined the Academy, and then to offer some advice to 1Ls, as well as take questions at the end. My hope is that folks can turn your cameras on if you're comfortable, so that the faculty have something to look at more than just black boxes with the names. But I understand folks may be trying to eat lunch, so turn them on if you're comfortable and whenever you're willing to. I'm going to very briefly read their bios so you know a little bit about their backgrounds. And then we will move on with asking each of them to speak alphabetically in order. So first, I'm going to start with introducing you to Professor Michelle Wild-Anderson, who is a scholar of state and local government law. Her work combines legal analysis, empirical research, and humanistic reporting to understand concentrated poverty and municipal fiscal distress. She's currently writing a book about what we need most from local governments in America's high poverty post-industrial areas. Prior to joining the Stanford Law School in 2014, she was an assistant professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley Law School. She's been a research fellow at the European Commission's Urban Policy Unit in Brussels and an environmental law fellow at Schutt, Mahaly, and Weinberger, which is a San Francisco-based private public interest law firm. She clerked for Judge Guido Calabrese on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit and Judge Marilyn Hall Patel of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. Professor Anderson is also the chair of the board of directors of the National Housing Law Project and a member of the board of directors of the East Bay Community Law Project in Oakland, California. Next, we'll have Professor Elizabeth A. Reese. Apologies, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right. Is it Yunpovi?
Yunpovi.
Yunpovi, thank you. Tewa Willowflower. She is a scholar of American Indian tribal law, federal Indian law, and constitutional law, focusing on the intersection of identity, race, citizenship, and government structure. Her scholarship examines the way government structures, citizen identity, and the history that is taught in schools can impact the rights and powers of oppressed racial minorities within American law. Prior to joining Stanford Law School, she served as the Harry A. Bigelow Teaching Fellow and lecturer in law at the University of Chicago. Previously, Professor Reese worked at the National Congress of American Indians, where she supported tribal governments across the country as they implemented expanded criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians under the 2013 Violence Against Women Act. Her comprehensive 5-year report on the tribal prosecutions thus far, which documented not only outcomes and unforeseen complications, but the surge of tribal law innovation brought on by expanded jurisdiction, has been widely cited everywhere from Congress to Supreme Court briefs. Professor Reese began her legal career as a civil rights litigator at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, where she led a desegregation case in one of the largest school districts in Florida and worked on the challenge to Alabama's voter ID law. She served as a law clerk to Judge Diane Wood on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit and Judge Amol Thaper on the Eastern District of Kentucky Court, now on the Sixth Circuit. She also was a fellow at the Senate Judiciary Committee and at the U.S. Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division's appellate section. And then last but not least is Professor David Alan Sklansky, who teaches and writes about criminal law, criminal procedure, and evidence. His newest book is A Pattern of Violence: How the Law Classifies Crimes and What It Means for Justice. He serves as faculty co-director of the Stanford Criminal Justice Center and is a faculty affiliate of Stanford Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity and a member of the American Law Institute. In 2017, he received the law school's John Bingham Hurlburt Award for Excellence in Teaching. Before joining the faculty of Stanford Law School in 2014, Professor Sklansky taught at UC Berkeley and UCLA, and he won campus-wide teaching awards at both those institutions. Earlier in his career, he practiced labor law in Washington, D.C., at a private public interest law firm, Brethoff Kaiser, served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Los Angeles, and served as a clerk to Justice Harry A. Blackmun of the U.S. Supreme Court and to Judge Abner J. Mivka of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. All right, so those are all the bios. I'm going to now turn it over to Professor Anderson. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Anna, and thanks everybody for being here. I really, like David said, as we were getting started, it's really wonderful to start to see 1Ls and to meet you in person. So it's I do hope, like Anna said, that you'll turn on your cameras so we can actually see you today. I wanted to start by role modeling a piece of the SLS culture that I hope will build and grow over time. And that's to be a little bit more honest about the way that tuition and debt and families affect people's job choices. And so I wanted to just start by disclosing that I graduated from law school with no debt. I was one of the last classes that graduated from UC Berkeley Law when it was actually public, which meant that my combined tuition to UC Berkeley over all 3 years of my legal education was less than $30,000. And that's not because I'm 100 years old, that's because it was actually public. And I'm a product of public education, you know, as a lifetime Californian, I'm a product of public education when public actually meant public. And so being really mindful of the way that's changed in California and the way that's changed in America for your generation, I sort of see the extra pressures that are on your class from the debt that some, but not all of you will take on across law school. So I think being honest about that is important. And the second thing I want to be honest about is that I think relationships matter a lot too in your world after law school. I consider myself not the public interest member of my family. I earn a really good living as a Stanford professor, but I support an affordable housing architect as my spouse, and so who makes even less than a public interest lawyer. And we together as a marital team are able to live a kind of good life together. And I think that's also important because the reality is that many of you will head out into the world sort of forming families in which your economic partnership and your economic team will be built jointly, and you'll sort of figure out together what it looks like to sort of make the living that you want for yourselves and for your families. So with that preface, I would just say one other thing about my background, which explains my path through law school, which is that before I came to law school, I basically never talked to a lawyer. I had, however, worked very, very closely with some people with JDs who I worshipped. And I call them people with JDs because that's how I thought of them. They were not practicing lawyers, but they had gotten a law degree. And I think I came to law school, you know, in their footsteps, imagining that I also would be a person with a JD, that I was coming to train and to learn about the sort of plumbing of American government, in particular to learn about America's racial history in the law. And I came to law school to learn those things, but intending always to kind of exit and go back into the world that I had been in before law school that I loved. But like most law students who go to law school, I drifted into trying to figure out if versions of being a lawyer suited me. And in my 1L summers, I worked in legal aid, which was a kind of natural analog to the civil rights and youth development work in public housing that I'd been doing before law school. And I worked at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, which was like my exciting kind of impact litigation stint. And I think through both of those, I loved both of those jobs. And in some ways, I feel like I've sort of nested up against those jobs for the rest of my career. But I think that I also learned a lot about myself, which is what will happen to you guys in your 1L and 2L summers too. And I learned that my tool, like the thing that I want to bring to social movements, is to be a writer. I didn't want my tool to be an oral advocate in court. I would be terrible at that and scared, and lots of reasons I'm ill-suited to litigation, and I'm very non-confrontational. You learn things about yourself. This is all to say. You will learn things about yourself when you're in these jobs. And I learned that, you know, or I admitted, I guess, that ever since I was in sixth grade, I wanted to be a writer. And so I figured that out mostly because a professor named Ian Haney Lopez was one of my professors at Berkeley Law, pulled me aside and helped me to think about that as an actual job that could pay my bills in my future. So I would say that as a generalized piece of advice for you guys, that should be your guiding principle across these 3 years in law school. It remains enough time that you can knock around and try a lot of different tools and a lot of different topics, and you can figure out the work that is most meaningful to you. And by meaningful, I really mean in the sense of sort of having a mission-driven career that suits the kind of contribution you want to make to your community and your society, but also a career that meets your family's needs and the needs of your your immediate family, your extended family, and your larger sense of community around you. So I think while law school is not normally thought of as a liberal arts education, I do encourage you to have a sense of self-discovery and wonder in how you pick classes, how you think about your summer jobs, how you think about your early choices after law school, as a way of really trying to settle on sort of the discrete tools that you can pick up as you graduate.
Thank you. Liz?
Yeah, so thank you all so much for coming. So I really want to pick up on a lot of what Professor Anderson just said about this process of deciding what you want to do with your career being really something that's very much about self-discovery. Law school, I think, is really pretty good at exposing you to a lot of different areas of the law and helping you sort of realize, okay, like I really care about this issue or that issue, and here's a different ways that the law, whether American law or international law, whatever have you, is intersecting with these things that I care about. And so then you might have this idea, okay, then I want to work in, criminal justice reform law stuff, right? But that's like a very broad actual field. There's this other half of self-discovery besides like sort of what do I care about that I could, see myself, getting up every day and working hard on. And that is, what are you good at? What makes you happy to do every day, not in terms of a topic, but also the activities you're doing? Are you someone who really likes, a fast-paced environment where you're constantly on edge and responding to emails and your adrenaline's going and that's the type of job for you? Or are you someone that likes to write and, kind of squirrel away and think through a complicated argument and write a brief or, something like that? And within the different areas of law and public interest law, there are a lot of different jobs that fit a lot of different types of people, and I think allow us to each make different contributions in our own way to this sort of broader, mission that we might all care about. And so the biggest piece of advice that I want to share, based on my own experience navigating all of this, is to really take seriously that self-discovery process for that second half, for figuring out, okay, but what's the job or series of jobs or types of jobs that I actually want to have within public interest, even aside from, what area I might want to work in possibly. Because I think we forget about that part and think that, okay, I really care about racial justice and civil rights. Here are some organizations that do that. I'm just going to apply for staff attorney positions. And then, that's probably what I should do, right? But, being a practicing attorney who does litigation work is really different than being someone, for example, on the policy staff of some of those organizations and the advocacy work that they do. And so, frankly, one of the only ways that you can really figure out what it is that you like and you are good at and sort of how you fit is by trying. And like either succeeding or deciding, I don't really like this. I kind of don't want to do this again. And 1L and 2L summers are just fantastic opportunities to really get yourself into some of those organizations or areas of legal practice or advocacy that you might, be thinking about working in, and to just try it out and see how you like it. You also get to see within those organizations, what are those different types of jobs that other people with JDs have? What are their lives like? What are their days like? Do you actually want to be, in that job or that job, ideally? And then, talk to them, develop mentorships to go from there and get advice in a more detailed way about charting your path from there. So that's really what I did. as my the introduction Anna provided, showcase. I have had several jobs since law school in public interest, and I've clerked, and I've been in policy, and I've been in more direct government relations. Before that, I worked in Congress for a while, so I also have had that as part of my career path. And I'm just really thankful that I put in all of that work to both figuring out really, what fit best for me, but also just learning about all of these different possibilities, paths that my career could have taken, so that I was able to make a really confident and informed choice about where I wanted to land. So that's my advice really there.
Thank you so much. David?
So first, welcome everyone. It's super exciting to see you. I'm really looking forward to meeting many of you, hopefully all of you, face to face, and not just as a name or face on a screen. I think I'm a person who tends to doubt myself a lot, but I have almost never doubted that I made the right decision by going to law school. I think law school is a really great career starter because it opens up so many paths, particularly associated with public interest. And I know there's no better place in the world to study law than Stanford Law School. So I'm really happy you're here. One of the things that makes this such a great law school is the strong, vibrant public interest community. And one of the things that's great about the public interest community here is that it's very Catholic and inclusive. It includes, for example, somebody like me, who is a former federal prosecutor. That's my public interest claim. That's what gives me public interest cred. And at a lot of law schools, that wouldn't count as public interest, but Stanford takes a very broad approach, which I appreciate because it means I can join the club. I took a very circuitous route throughout my career. So when I graduated law school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew two things for sure. I didn't want to be a trial lawyer because I had taken a trial advocacy class that I really disliked and didn't do very well at. This was at a different law school, not this one. And I knew that I didn't want to be a law professor. Again, because of my experiences at a different law school. And then I spent 7 years as a trial lawyer, as a federal prosecutor, and then transitioned to be a law professor. So careers can take different paths. I thought when I went to law school, I wanted to be an environmental lawyer. And then I changed my mind because I tried that one summer and didn't particularly like it. And I got very interested in labor law and thought I wanted to be a labor lawyer. And I did that for a summer, liked it a little more, went to that firm after I clerked. And it's a fabulous firm, but decided like within a week or two of getting there that it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And then I went off to be a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles for 7 years, which I loved, and it was life-changing for me, and I'm really glad I did it. I can talk if if people are interested about why I decided that I wanted to be a federal prosecutor or what I liked about it. But I want to leave time for Q&A. So I'll cut to the other part of what Anna asked us to talk about, which was my advice. So first, +1 to what Michelle and Elizabeth said about being open to new experiences and trying out different possibilities. Totally agree with that. Be open and adventurous. The second piece of advice is to believe in yourself, which it sounds easy or pat, but it's super hard to do. And there are two parts of that. One is believing in your abilities, and the other is believing in your choices. So Stanford Law School is an amazing place. Your classmates are amazing people, and you don't see all of the doubts and turmoil inside of them. You just see their outsides, and you compare that to your insides. So some of you will get through all 3 years without ever doubting whether you really belong here and whether you can really cut it. But most of you won't. Most of you will have some moments where you think, I'm just not smart enough for that. I can't, I'm not sure that I can cut this. So you can. The admissions people here are super good. They almost never make mistakes. So the fact that you're here means you can cut it here. You're going to also have moments when you wonder whether you made the right decision by coming to law school. And one of the reasons that you're going to have those moments is most of you have gotten where you are in part because you're very good at sort of figuring out what the program is and going with it. And despite what I said about law school being really, really great preparation, there's one hazard in law school is that you can do lots of different things with a degree, including lots of things that you won't want to do. And it is easy at points in law school when everybody else seems to be doing what you need to do to grab the next ring of one kind or another, to get a fancy law firm job over the summer, or to get a fancy judicial clerkship. And you don't feel like it's what you want to do, and you make that decision, and then you just begin to think, really, am I messing up here? Because you've been working all your life sort of grabbing whatever the next ring is. So when you have those doubts, I mean, it doesn't hurt to reconsider whether, maybe it really does make sense to get a judicial clerkship, or it really does make sense to try for law review. So talk to some people, but keep in mind that you're really smart. And if you made an initial decision that to come to law school for a particular reason, thinking you wanted to pursue a particular career path, there's a good chance you were right about that. Now, there's a good chance you're sort of like me and you came thinking you wanted to do one kind of law, and you'll wind up deciding you want to do another kind of law. But although I changed the kind of job that I wound up getting, I didn't really change what I was looking for in a legal career. And I suspect that you won't either, and that you shouldn't.
Thank you all so much for those initial comments. So I'd love to take questions from students. You can either use the Zoom function to raise your hand. It's a small enough group, I can call on you that way, or you can private chat me and I'm happy to ask the question for you. And all questions are fair game. I just want to be clear, there are no stupid questions. So anything you're curious about, we've got these 3 brilliant scholars and former public interest lawyers who are now academics on the line with us. All right, I see I have one question. How did you end up in academia from public interest?
I can talk about that. So I was, again, I just want to acknowledge my gratitude that I'm considered somebody who was in public interest, even though what I was doing was being a prosecutor. I loved the job, but part of what I loved about the job, part of why I decided I didn't want to stay at the law firm where I wound up, was it had a super steep learning curve, the U.S. Attorney's Office job, which is to say that at the law firm, I was writing appellate briefs, which is not exactly the same thing as writing a law school exam. And it's not exactly the same thing as writing a bench memo for a judge when you're clerking, but it's close enough that it didn't really feel bracing and challenging enough. And so I wanted to do some, I knew that I had a lot to learn about how to write good briefs, but I also knew that I already could do it okay. So I wanted to do something where I wasn't sure I could do it at all, let alone be good at it. And being a trial lawyer was a thing like that. Plus, I was attracted by the moral challenges of being a prosecutor. When I was clerking, I found myself getting angry at prosecutors and thinking, you should be able to do this the right way. You should be able to get a conviction or drop the case and make sure that you're doing justice. So I wanted to see, is that really right? I mean, how do you navigate the challenge, the moral challenges of being a prosecutor? So I was attracted to that part of it as well. So after 7 years as a prosecutor, I knew I could do it. I mean, again, there's a lot of more stuff I had a long way to go before. I mean, I had lots of room for improvement, but I was past the point where I didn't know whether I could do it at all. And I wanted to get back to doing something like that, where I wasn't, where it felt fresh and challenging. So trying to be a law professor seemed like an example of that. So then that's how I decided to do it. And I'm not sure if the question was, how did I make the decision or logistically, how do you do that? I'm happy to talk about that part too. Although really, I would say when you're at the very beginning of your first year, you don't need to worry about that part quite yet, although I'm happy to talk about it.
Anna, I'll jump in with just a quick comment about that, just for you guys to reflect about. I think it's useful as you go through law school to try some experiences that put you in the work of a generalist, and also some that are closer to what feel like your natural specialization. Because I think people are just really different. Some of us are wired as generalists, where we like to change a lot of what we're learning quickly. And I think some of us are really hardwired as specialists. And one of the things that I figured out, which was part of why I became an academic, is that I'm wired as a specialist. Like, I'm deeply, for whatever reasons, I have some areas, for me, it's land and civil rights and housing, that are just they run really deep in my family and who I am and what I'm interested in. And there aren't that many jobs in that space. So like finding a path to being a specialist in that, who also wants a writing heavy occupation, like there weren't a lot of choices. But I didn't figure that out until years after I graduated from law school. So I would just encourage you to reflect more broadly on this question of whether you're the kind of person who likes a lot of intellectual turnover in your career or in your daily life, or the kind of person who wants to kind of burrow into an area of expertise and stay there. So I think that is one generalizable, thing that all lawyers choose. You can see them kind of shaking out that way as they go forward in their careers.
Did you want to add something, Liz?
They pretty much cover. The only thing I would have had to add was just that I decided to become a law professor, both I think because I felt like it was a good fit for my talents, as I discussed, and how, I could make the most use of those, but also because I was fine, but I wasn't bad at being a trial litigator. But I was also, things about that job that other people love, I just totally hated, and the only way that you're going to learn that is by doing it. I was taking, one of the amazing things about public interest jobs, which is a little bit not what the party line is sometimes for in comparison with firm jobs is, a lot of times they're like, oh, at firms, they give you lots of experience and then that could be good training for the things. But like one of the things that happens at a lot of public interest litigation shops is like they have no money and no, like they don't have enough people to be like wasting time kind of training you on, or like, letting you dip your toe in. They're like throwing you in the deep end with like a lot of responsibility that other lawyers at bigger firms don't get for a long time. So, my first year as a fellow at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, like I was taking depositions. I was like, in this really, more mid-level role for this intense part of the discovery and big litigation cases that were, really important and issues that I cared about. But I was just, it was important, but I wasn't loving it. I was always on the road. I felt like, preparing for depositions was mostly just the same stuff over and over again. And I saw my colleagues just getting like jazzed up about the fight every time. And I was not, because we're different people. You're different people from your classmates. And so I think that self-awareness was really key to me. I was thinking about some of the bigger issues behind the law with the cases we were looking at, and like, writing up law review articles on the weekends, which, is maybe a good indication I should be a law professor, which is, and here we are. But so yeah, just that kind of self-awareness, I think, is at least how I got here. And I think how other people get where they're supposed to be with what just makes you happy.
Thank you. We do have 5 or 6 questions in the chat, but I want to turn to Ambus because I see your hands up. So please feel free to ask your question.
Sorry to jump the chat, but thank you all for your sharing your personal experiences. We really appreciate it. Just toward this last point that both Professors Reese and Anderson were addressing, I'm wondering if you all could address those few other kind of jobs that would allow you to kind of perform this specialist writing that you guys both kind of identified as ultimately important for you on a day-to-day basis. And Professor Anderson, specifically, if you wanted to elaborate on your conversation with your law professor that kind of alerted you to that career, and how you, I don't know, what steps you took after that realization toward figuring out what that job might look like.
Oh, that's a good story. Professor Lopez took me aside as a 3L, and he grew up in Hawaii and had has a lifetime love of surfing, and so he told this story in surfing terms. But he described how important it was in surfing to go for it and not always yield the wave. I know nothing about surfing, even though I grew up in San Diego. But so I just took this for what it was worth. But his longer message to me was to dare to compete. And he said that I needed to sort of find the courage, because like David Sklansky was describing, most of us head into law school, and this was certainly true of me, with really very little self-confidence and no sense of sort of where I would be in the world. I mean, anyway, I had a very modest kind of scope planned for my job, and it really was mostly about being close to other people I loved and admired. That was like my #1 career goal, was like support my family and work adjacent to amazing people, which I've gotten to do. But anyway, Professor Lopez said, dare to compete. And it was really deep advice about kind of stepping out of my comfort zone and kind of pushing myself to try new things that were harder. And that's the only reason I ever applied for clerkships. It's the only reason I took some of the career choices after law school. And it's certainly the only reason they came around to thinking about being an academic. So I'll leave it there for Liz.
I don't know, because I think that, like, I guess I would say one of the things I actually like about being a law professor is the way that I get to be a bit of a generalist more than I actually was when I was out in the policy world. Or when I was doing litigation, I think, because and that's very much a choice with how I structure my work and how it fits into larger conversations, et cetera. But I think that one of the things that I found, but I guess the part of the question that I think this also leads to is also the role that like mentors play in helping you figure this out. And what I would say on that especially is that if you were to ask my law professors from when I was in law school, like I think the ones who I worked with really closely probably knew way before I did that this was something that I was going to maybe end up doing. And I think that's really a insightful point. We, especially those of us who have been out in the world of law and policy and public interest and et cetera, and these things that you care about, not only do we know that world and maybe a lot of the different job options that exist out there, but then we, if we get to know you pretty well as people, we also know you, and sort of a bit about who you are and how you work and what you care about and what makes you sort of thrive as a mind and as a person within at least the classroom. And so I think we sometimes can be really a great source of advice for saying, you might want to try this out. It might be a good fit for you in a way that you don't, even see yourself, because we've been around the block. we know some things, and we try to do our best to know you very well too. So.
Did you want to add anything, David?
No.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the chat. The next question was, what is something you wish you would have done or wish you would have done differently in your public interest career?
Well, I'll answer that one because it's a good example of not doing what Michelle and Liz stressed it was important to do, which is to try out different things and be adventurous. So I had 2 job offers for the summer after my 1L year. One of them was with the Environmental Defense Fund in Washington, D.C. And the other one was with DNA People's Legal Services in Window Rock, Arizona on the Navajo Reservation. And I picked the Environmental Defense Fund job. Part I would say, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I think part of it it felt safer and easier. I like moving out to Window Rock. I didn't know what that would be like. I'd have to get a car. It just seemed hard. Whereas I knew a whole bunch of people who were going down to Washington, D.C. for the summer. I knew how I could find a place to live there. I was sure I'd have friends to hang out with. So that's why I went. And I mean, it was a good job. Environmental Defense Fund is a terrific organization. And I was lucky to work with them. It also taught me something. I mean, it helped me understand what I didn't like about working as an environmental lawyer. Still, if I had it to do over, I would take the DNA People's Legal Services job in a minute because it would have been more different. It would have pushed me in new ways. I would have learned a lot more. I would have been challenged in lots of ways. My horizons would have been opened more. So that's something I wish I had done.
Very quick error that I made. I had this idea because I'd been out of I'd been out working for 4 years before law school, that I should just gorge on everything I didn't know in law school, and that I didn't need to take classes that I felt like I'd had more contact with in work. And that, as a specialist, that was a super weird decision. I never took local government law, and I've spent my life now teaching it, which was totally a bad choice. And I never took admin law and a lot of other things that are related to the function of government, not because I thought I knew those, but because I just didn't care about the federal government. I had these kind of ideas about what I needed to know, and also just what I wanted to know. So I encourage you to sort of find a balance when you pick classes of sort of stretching yourself to things that feel adjacent to what you're most interested in, indulging yourself in things that just seem awesome and fun and interesting for any reason or no reason, and then also reaching for classes where the sort of meat and potatoes or whatever of friends and family law, because the reality is, I mean, some people call these things bar classes, but the truth is that they're a lot of what we get called on to do as lawyers in community with other people and in families is subjects related to kind of bar law. And reading the newspaper as a person in 2021, I really regret I didn't take First Amendment. These like classes that just seemed kind of not relevant to what I was working on, but are things that lawyers kind of should understand in order to be a voter and a friend and a person in modern society. So I think, giving yourself a nice, healthy mix of material that's sort of connected to what you know and what you want to learn, and also, outside of that comfort zone.
Yeah, so my answer is not really something that I would have done differently in terms of the choices that I made for, what jobs to have or clerkships or, relationships, et cetera. I think it more has to do with the mentality that I had while I was navigating those, and how important that, having a healthy one is. Being, going to a firm is like a very straightforward path, and it's done, and then you can just be there for a while. And by contrast, doing a lot of public interest jobs, is by comparison far more chaotic, frankly, because the timing is different. It's later. You're navigating a lot of different time frames for a lot of different jobs, which is, I think much more just like normal how job processes work outside of law school, and sort of the pathways that have been set up and established with the firm route. But that is difficult. It is stressful to be applying to all these different things at once, not knowing, when you're going to hear back. And getting a job knowing that it's a fellowship and it's going to be for a certain duration, and then maybe something else that's for a limited duration, and then a clerkship. There's a lot of changes that are going on that you have to be really patient with. And I would say that I navigated all of that sort of knowing that this was part of what it was going to be like, but I would still sort of at times be hard on myself about it, I suppose, instead of more, take it with more grace and forgiving that, this is just part of this world that I'm navigating. And, it's not my fault that I didn't get this first job I applied for. And so now I'm also still in this process of chaos trying to, get this other fellowship of things. So I think knowing that that's how this is just going to go, and having, less of a probably, I'm like an old millennial, so like a sort of millennial type, like perfectionist, hard on ourselves mentality, for all of that is actually just way healthier and helps you just be like, okay, you know, on to the next thing. Like, this is my path. Like, this is how my path is supposed to be. I think is way more healthy.
The next question asks, any good course recommendations for spring and winter quarters that one else can take?
Well, I'm teaching a seminar in democracy and criminal justice, and that's open to one else. I think it'll be a good class. I'm kind of, despite the fact I would love to see as many of you as possible in that class, I agree with Michelle that often the classes that are super helpful to take are the ones that sound really boring. It just, when I was in practice as a prosecutor, it was a problem for me that I hadn't taken classes like secure transactions or accounting for lawyers, because I was prosecuting businesses for financial fraud, and it's hard to make that. It's hard to investigate and prosecute those cases when you don't have a really strong handle on how business is supposed to operate. So it would have been helpful to me to have taken more boring sounding corporate and transactional classes.
Can I ask?
Evidence is offered in the spring and in the winter. I'm teaching in the spring, and George Fisher is teaching it in the winter. I think that's a really good class. A lot of one-ons take it, partly because you can get certified and appear in court in many jobs that, during your 1L summer if you've had evidence. And at most law schools, you don't have an opportunity to take evidence in your first year. It's another thing that's great about this law school.
All right, I'll move on to the next question. This student asks, can we address the elephant in the room, the debt question, more directly? All of this is great advice, but my biggest doubt by far is whether I will be able to survive financially in a public interest career after financing law school entirely with debt. LRAP seems great in theory, but plugging $300,000 or more into the calculator and guesstimating a reasonable salary trajectory still seems to result in a steep, steep uphill repayment climb.
Me. I got this. I'm still in debt, but so I totally have this. Here's what I'll say about this. I went to Harvard for law school, which has a similar public interest repayment program, and I knew that I was going to be taking on a tremendous amount of debt. And yet still doing the public interest career that I wanted, and I would just be on that plan. So I know less about the nitty gritty of the Stanford plan, being both a newly hired faculty member and also not having gone through it myself the way that I know about what it's like at Harvard. But what I will say is that I think, for me at least, not coming from a high income background in the first place made it feel, frankly, eminently reasonable to have the lifestyle that was acceptable to me, given the loan payments and the amount of assistance I was getting, and then whatever salary it is. So the way that it usually works is, you get a amount of assistance that's based off of the, sort of how poor you are within the public interest career, specifically, or specific job that you have chosen. And so, that number would get adjusted for me every single time I would fill out or change jobs. I'd have to fill out new paperwork, update them. They'd update how much assistance I was eligible for. I'm doing that for years and years and years now. but I have not felt like, you know, strapped for money or like destitute or anything. You know, like I'm a Harvard educated lawyer. Like I've had nice apartments and, you know, bought food and traveled and done the things I want. You know, is that very different than, you know, making the amount of money you would make at a firm? Like, yes. But it's also very doable with a life. It's going to take that, you know, period of time that the school has allocated for you to pay off those loans. One thing I would caution though is that, you know, I have heard from other people, sometimes there is this like sense of, oh, like, you know, should I be doing other things with my money? Like, oh, should I buy a nice, you know, should I be buying a nice car or something? It's like, no, like you don't need to live like a super fancy wealthy lawyer because you have a fancy law degree. Like live the life you want. You know, I've used Prius. I love it. Like, you know, but so that's what I'll say on that. I do think that there are, of course, places in specific financial situations that I think don't necessarily mesh as well with some of the loan repayment programs as we'd always love them to, like supporting extended family members, stuff like that. I've heard that things like that can be very difficult. And so if that's a reality for you or your family, obviously that's something, you know, to talk about or take into consideration. But, you know, I have found like, you know, getting through this debt something that is, you know, totally reasonable as long as you know, have that expectation for it.
Yeah, that's amazing, Liz. And I just want to add that after many years of working with students on this exact question, I think it's so important, like I said at the outset, to be super open about it and to be learning about it and thinking about it as you go through law school. And actually, you know, doing some real math, because like Liz captured, LRAP is not as tight as the budget actually is for somebody trying to pay down their debt with a firm salary in 2 or 3 years. So there's kind of this idea that an alternative to LRAP is sort of, I'm going to go to a firm for 2 to 3 years and I'm going to, you know, crush this debt and like start over and sort of go back to zero. And I think when you really, I've had a lot of students over the years who've really gone into firms with that plan. And it takes a lot of discipline to do that. It takes like choosing crappy housing that is not at the same par as the people you're working with. It takes never engaging in retail therapy, even though you work 80 hours a week and like want to do that. I mean, there's a lot of habits over the years that my students have sort of talked through with me of just really, you know, having to decide they're going to pull their social life away from the high earners that they work with in order to just beat that debt down. So it's hard. And I think either way, whether you're going to, you know, go that kind of path or you're going to live on LRAP, it does require a little bit of pulling away from American consumerism and materialism. And the reality is that we live in an exceptionally materialistic culture. Don't get me started about that. And, you know, there are really good reasons, like Liz captured, to question that for yourself anyway, apart from, you know, sort of the question of how you're going to live with debt. And so I just encourage you to sort of really look at it to break bread with other students who are thinking about it and so work through it in community with other people. And also just underscore, you know, what Liz also mentioned, which is that for some students who intend to immediately, even for their summers, pull chunks of their income back for their families, I think that's a, you know, that's a separate question. It's super important to support students who are doing that, and for all of us to remember that, you know, that's part of the obligations that a lot of us bring into this building, and or not this building, but SLS, and to support each other in pulling that off in law school and the years after.
I'll just make a quick plug. I'm happy to talk to any students individually. I can walk you through the calculator, connect you with alums with similar financial goals or concerns. And I did post a link in the chat with some testimonials from alumni who chose to remain anonymous in most cases, just talking a little bit about how they make LRAP work for them. And I think a few key factors: where you live makes a difference. You know, an alum moved from LA to Las Vegas, went from sharing an apartment to having a 3-bedroom house. I mean, where you live makes a difference. Whether or not your partner is someone who makes equal or less money than you or more can make a difference. Whether you choose to prioritize travel over homeownership or you prioritize something else. So do read through those testimonials, but feel free to schedule an appointment with me. I'm happy to talk this through with you as well. I think we have time for one more question, so I'm going to ask this really quickly. In what ways do judicial clerkships better prepare you for public interest work, and would you recommend them for students interested in public interest public service?
So you should start with this one.
Well, thank you, David. I mean, I have too much to say about it. What can I say? So I think that a judicial clerkship is public interest work. So I want to just say that, and there's lots of time for those of you or one else to talk about what that job is and why I think that. So I'll just bracket that for future discussion, but just full stop. I think it is a public interest job. And also for me, as somebody who'd come to law school from a nonprofit background, it was a really good living for a couple of years. So it was actually like, it was secure and amazing in so many ways on a personal level, even as I felt like I was able to do really good, meaningful work in the world as a young professional. But secondly, the reality of public interest jobs in big cities, so that's, the kind of big metro markets where not only you would find more law jobs, but your partner, whoever they are, would also probably find more jobs no matter what their profession is. So, the larger story of American spatial inequality is that we're like gravitating lots of jobs into these few metro areas. And a lot of the public interest work and public service and government work is there too. And so that larger sort of phenomenon in the country means that the competition for public interest jobs is steep. And you guys as Stanford law grads are as well positioned for that competition as anybody. But the reality is that many public interest jobs in big markets like that, effectively, they don't require clerkships. There are always exceptions, but the vast majority of people who end up with the jobs in those big cities have clerkships. Outside of those big metros, it's totally different. I mean, I feel like what Anna said, you just have to like underline it 6 times, like where you live matters. It matters for your job prospects. It matters for whether you need a clerkship. It matters for, your finances. There are just so many levels where you should always be questioning whether you want to be, whether you need or want to end up in New York City or San Francisco. But if you do, then, I think that clerkships are really, as a practical matter, they're an important credential for those jobs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Both of my judicial clerkships were fantastic and, tremendous learning experiences for me about the law and how it works and what it's like to be on the other side of that bench. And what that decision-making process is like. It makes you a better lawyer in just innumerable ways. What I will say, and I'll say this again probably another million times to lots of you, and I want you to actually take it seriously instead of just being like, and then like not taking this advice, is that I found district court clerkships, my district court clerkship, to be a much bigger learning experience than my circuit court clerkship and much more valuable to my career in the long run. Even though, I love my circuit court judge so much and she's, like the best woman on earth. It's just the nature of those jobs is being a district court clerk is exposing you to what the law is like and how it works at the trial level, with things like motions practice and the chaos of scheduling and what a trial is like. And all of these things that you're not going to learn in law school, and that are very little like the things that you're being trained to do in law school, which is more so sort of writing at the appellate level and thinking at the appellate level. Frankly, you're reading judicial opinions from appellate court judges or above constantly. And so even though a lot of lawyers, what you're doing is you're practicing at the trial level. So I really, advise people to take district court clerkships really, really seriously and prioritize them as a probably better learning experience for you and your career. But, that being said, circuit court clerkships are what's like more prestigious. So, everybody, what is it? Lemmings and so I'll say this another 100 times and then, but still the lemmings are lemmings. So, but that is nonetheless my advice. I clerked on a district court in Kentucky. Yes, like Kentucky. I had no ties to Kentucky. I was probably one of like 6 Indians in all this part of Kentucky while I was there. So it was a learning experience in all types of ways, including culturally. But I'm so glad I did it.
I think clerking is great. I think in general, my advice to anyone, public interest or not public interest, is if you don't know whether you want to clerk or not, you should probably clerk. On the other hand, I don't think it's essential. So if it really feels to you like something you don't want to do, I wouldn't do it.
All right, I do see we're a little bit past 2 and folks have to get back to class. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to all 3 professors, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.